Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to the first, but actually the second one, because we had an episode number 0 of Seeing God in Biology. So this is our first session, and it was about DNA wires, and it was quite a blast. Thank you, Faz, for this great presentation.
Thanks, Ahmed, for inviting me to be part of the series we're doing on seeing God in biology. It's just been a lot of fun. What could be more fun than talking about the incredible features of God's creation and marveling at them and enjoying them? So, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, and it is actually my pleasure. So actually, after we have talked about DNA wires, I went and I saw a presentation by Dr. Jacqueline Barton, who is the one that you pointed at in the show, that has essentially had the major contribution in discovering this amazing wire capability of DNA. And she's in this setting, which is like a science conference, and she gives like a 45-minute presentation. And then at the end, actually, I am really quite shocked with the comment at the end. I just really would like to share it with you and with the audience, and then maybe it's a good starting point for this discussion, because it's really yeah. Here you go. So I'll be sharing it now. So let's hear what was said. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think we have any time for questions now, but I think this is an excellent illustration of discovery and how nature is using what there is. Nature is not reading textbooks in biochemistry. She is using every possibility, and it's just for us, for you to discover it.
That's
right.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
Wow. So yeah, you know what I mean now.
Yes. Yes.
So at the end, the guy says, nature is using every possibility. Okay. It's like I go, come on, what are you talking about? So really, the comment shocked me, Fuzz, because isn't it like strikingly obvious to anybody who watches your marvelous presentation about the topic and our discussion, and or her own presentation, which was really great, about the topic, ingenuity in design, using electricity where you will never expect it to be. And she goes on describing how other scientists have tried, to find out if DNA has conductivity or not, and they couldn't find out because when they try it without water or at the wrong temperature or whatever, it doesn't work. And everything in her presentation just screaming irreducible complexity from one side, fine tuning from the other side, fit for purpose from a third one, foresight, integrated systems, ingenious engineering, all of them aspects of definitely not nature using what's there.
Yeah.
Definitely of something else. So what's your comment on this unbelievable closing of the gentleman in the event?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many things that go through my mind, and maybe the first thing to bring up is that statement is a statement that I've seen made many times, both verbal statements as well as in print, and it's very similar to the way that Francis Crick closes his book, What Mad Pursuit, which is an autobiographical discussion of the discovery of the structure of DNA. It's a marvelous book to read, fascinating book. But Crick was an atheist, and he was an outspoken atheist as well. And in the close of the book, he says biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. And this is a famous statement, but what he is acknowledging is that the first thing your first reaction to biochemistry is our reaction, that this is a marvelous design system. There's an ingenuity to it. And his argument is, and an admonition to biologists is, even though you're tempted to see this as designed, remember that this is the product of evolution. And it felt like the commentator, or the host or the MC, almost had to go out of his way to remind people that this was the product of evolution, right?
Absolutely.
It's
exactly what I felt.
Right, that evolution isn't reading textbooks, right? Well, even then, there's almost this implication that there's, an ingenuity to these systems. But to me, what you look at in the structure of DNA, and we'll talk more about this, I think, in a future episode, is that every aspect of its structure is playing a central and critical role to its role as an information storage system, including the wire properties, right? That there's nothing in the structure of DNA that's accidental, or that is the happenstance outworking of a unguided, historically contingent process that just stumbled upon this system. But rather, every aspect of it plays a critical role. There's a rationale, a deep-seated rationale behind the structure of DNA. And so, to me, that's completely contradictory to the idea that this is just what evolution threw together, and just evolution took advantage of what was there. Because isn't it fortunate that, with DNA you have these just right subunit molecules that combine in just right ways to make nucleotides that in turn assemble into these systems with just right properties that quote unquote evolution could somehow take advantage of. Either evolution won a bunch of lotteries at the same time, or somebody purposed it to be this way. And so, if you're going to say that evolution is just using what's available, boy, evolution is sure lucky that everything it needs is available.
Absolutely. And actually, before commenting on what you've said, I'll share the comment of our friend Man's Man. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You like his avatar last time. So he says, it's equal parts infuriating and hilarious to see people try to weasel their way out of saying someone did it. And isn't it what it always seems to be avoided? Like when people are completely at awe and they want to say, wow, God is great, or something, or praise be to God, or this kind of thing. Or, oh my God, or something. Then somebody comes out like Francis Crick in his textbook, or this guy at the closing of the conference. Remember, guys, this is nature, and it didn't read the textbook. Well, it didn't read the textbook, all right. It is writing it, but definitely not nature. It's definitely not nature writing anything. So it's absolutely
you can't avoid the design implications. And so what you see people do oftentimes is they personify evolution. This is what evolution did. Evolution is smarter than we are, to quote Leslie Orgel, right? And so you're personifying evolution, but you're saying things that believers would say about God. And so you have, in effect, called it evolution so that you can stick to a materialistic explanation, but yet you are really attributing to evolution what should be rightly attributed to God. And it's interesting. And in the New Testament, and I just I apologize to bring in this statement, but it fits so perfectly. Is the Apostle Paul is writing to the church at Rome, And he's making the point that, look, God has revealed himself to us so plainly through nature that no one is without an excuse. No one can say that God didn't sufficiently provide evidence for his existence, and therefore I'm somehow justified in my rebellion against God. It's like, no, even if nobody presented, God to you, through evangelistic efforts or through teachings or whatever, you would still know that there has to be a God. But then he talks about that the tendency of human beings is to suppress God's revelation, and then to in turn worship the creation instead of the creator who is to be praised, to quote Paul. And so what you see happening here is that people are worshiping, they have a worshipful response. They are in awe, but what they do is they then in turn take that awe, and instead of direct it to God, are directing it to the creation itself, where it's almost like a worship of the marvels of the creation, where creation is worshipped as opposed to the creator. And Paul's point is that this is just the tendency of the human heart to be in rebellion. But thankfully, there are people like you and me who do see God in the creation and worship God. And so our task is to help people to worship God, not worship the creation, right?
And actually, the striking thing is that he uses this personified reference to nature. She is using what's there, referring to nature, like giving nature a person and a mind and a gender and everything, and she's using. She's not reading. Come on, man. What are you talking about? So we have another comment here from Illidan Storm Rage. Okay, so he says, this reminds me of Robert Hazen lecture Co-Evolution of the Geosphere and the Biosphere, minute 52 to 53. He says, I challenge scientists to design trilobite eyes. Oh my God, I don't mean intelligent design, I mean evolution. So he immediately changes.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, and this is where I think many biologists could be well served by developing some understanding of engineering. And this is why I so much enjoy our work together, because you have insight into engineering that I just don't have. And that insight just enriches the evidence for design that we see. But to me, what's very intriguing is the increasingly engineers are turning to designs in biology to inspire new technology, and biologists are now trying to create designs using biological systems. And in both instances, what's exposed is the brilliance of the designs in biology, the fact that we mimic them to inspire new technology. And then when we try to create something that looks like a living system, this is Robert Hazen's point, try to create a trilobite eye. If you are an optics engineer, good luck with that. You're never going to accomplish this, right? You're never going to accomplish the elegance of this system. When even to try to create the simplest protocell that can grow and replicate requires enormous amount of ingenuity, enormous amount of understanding of nature. And then the scientists that actually pull this off are displaying a level of ingenuity in their experimental protocols. And then they have to be so precise in their laboratory manipulations. It's providing empirical evidence, for design. And so you can't escape the design implications if you really are honest.
Absolutely. And actually, this trilobite comment of Hazen, because a trilobite is essentially an arthropod. It's like an insect, right?
Yeah.
So there is also an ayah, like can be translated like a verse in the Quran that says, يا أيها الناس ضرب مثل فاستمعوا له إن الذين تدعون من دون الله لا يخلقوا ذبابا ولو اجتمعوا له. And what it means is, oh people, I'm giving you a parable, so hear it attentively. Those whom you are praying to or calling their names, instead of Allah, will not create a fly, even if they come together for it.
Mm.
All right. So it's like a challenge. And it strikes me, I didn't hear this Robert Hazen comment before, but obviously he's looking at trilobites and he's looking at trilobite eyes. And flies actually happen to have the same kind of compounded eyes like trilobites.
Yeah.
And a fly is so sophisticated, it's so small, and we just do like this to throw it away. And God is saying this: all of those whom you are making like partners to me, and this obviously includes nature and evolution and all the other name tags, they cannot. And obviously he's now referring even to people. If you think that this is possible, don't even wait for evolution to do it. Just bring on your scientists and go on and try to create just one fly. And I was actually doing this conversation with Dr. James Tour, and I told him, Jim, there's this verse in the Quran. What do you think? He said, we don't even hope to come any close to a fly. He just said exactly what you're saying. Just being even close to a protocell, not even a cell, is just a complete dream. Nobody can do it. And so really, and it really struck me. I was having this conversation once with some evolutionist, and I was telling him this, and he says, we're just discussing that life cannot happen by chance, etc. So I tell him, okay, if it's that easy and if it just can happen by chance without any mind, why don't somebody in a lab just create a cell and show us? Start from raw materials and create a cell. And he says maybe they are not creating it because nobody cares. Because well, why would it be useful? Why would anybody spend money to create a cell? And I go, what are you talking about? So what do you think? Is it something that if today somebody creates a cell with all the sophistication, what kind of change to the technology that we have, if we have the ability to create a cell, what can we do with it?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a whole area of synthetic biology where the goal is to engineer artificial non-natural life forms. And there are two approaches. One is the top-down, and the other is the bottom-up approach, where the goal is that if you can make synthetic cells, that these become, in effect, platforms that then you can add different genetic capabilities to really create organisms that can do all kinds of very useful things. Make medicines, vaccines, bioplastics, green fuels, the list goes on and on. They could remediate pollution from the environment. And so there's an enormous amount of effort being sunk into the creation of synthetic cells because they see them as these miniature bioreactors that could really revolutionize industry. And so people that are working in synthetic biology or commenting on it see this as the fourth industrial revolution, that this is going to usher us into a new type of future. And many of the world's problems very well could be solved, through the use of synthetic biology. So to say that nobody cares about this is a comment of how unaware do you have to be about what's happening at the frontiers of science to make that kind of comment. It's not a question of nobody cares about this, or this is a problem that isn't worth working on. No, the whole burgeoning area of synthetic biology speaks otherwise. And again, when you look at the work that's going on in synthetic biology, these are some of the best minds in the world that are working on this, that are accomplishing things that are worthy of our celebration. These men and women that are working in this area are worthy of our respect. It's science and technology at its best, and yet at the same time, they struggle to really achieve even the simplest activities that the cell does with a high degree of robustness.
absolutely. And the thing here that draws my attention in this um, very presentation of ours, which you have actually pointed out at the end of the session, is the fact that we are really discovering technologies that were completely unimaginable to us. That this molecule, it's amazing that it's a molecule. This huge thing is just one molecule, DNA, can actually transmit electricity, and then we find that those um, other components that are around it, that are part of its functionality, are actually exploiting the feature. So DNA is using the feature, and then when DNA is disrupted, the power is cut, and then when those other modules are stuck there, this cut of power causes them to clinch and then to go and find the place where the interruption is occurring, and then to spawn a repair mechanism, etc. So I just want to comment on the last thing we said on the show, which was when I asked you if there is an evolutionary solution to this, because having given it some more thought, I'm thinking like this in engineering terms. Let's say that DNA starts first by not being able to exploit this electrical capability, okay, and hence it still is it's incurring all those damages, and then there are all those other damage repair elements. But now those damage repair elements have to browse a 3 billion base pair genome. And even if somebody says, well, humans are very advanced in the evolutionary tree, that must have happened much earlier. But even in the presentation of Jacqueline Barton, she says that even in the case of E. coli, which has a very minuscule genome compared to the human one, that without this feature, the MUT elements will not have enough time to do a complete scan to the genome, given their small numbers. And hence the implication will be, if DNA does not come with this feature right at the beginning, all what will happen is that it will be completely degraded by mutations. It will go away, and the repair mechanisms will just not work. So there isn't even time for evolution to fix anything, because the whole system will go down into rubble before the cell knows it. And it just reminds me of some other things that I was just going through about cancer, etc., that relate to giving people, for example, drugs that will create some inhibition for some error correction factors, so that the cancerous cells will die away fast, and then they will remove the medicine. So the other cells will now get rid of the cancer, and they will fill the space. So at the end of the day, we are actually using the same thing. Once we disable a cell's ability to fix itself, in this case, we are targeting the cancerous cells because we want it to go away. It is only a very short time until the whole species of cancer cells are completely out of the plateau. So it just strikes me that they just keep on saying the same arguments about, I don't know, co-option or whatever other fancy words that they throw on this. And on the ground, mathematically or engineering wise or logic wise, it doesn't work. So I don't know until when this is proceeds, but I'm sure you can. Do you relate to this, to what I'm saying? Do you agree that this would be actually a consequence if this mechanism was not there? Then there will not be a feasible way to do damage repair in a statistically meaningful manner.
Yes. I mean, the only other alternative would be to have such an overabundance of the repair proteins that they would have to survey the genome by binding to it and slowly creeping along the DNA. You would have to have so many of them at work that you would keep other transcription factors and the RNA polymerase and the DNA replication machinery from accessing the DNA. So, you want to have, a minimal number of proteins that are binding and debinding DNA, at least randomly, to survey that for damage, because otherwise you would essentially titrate out the ability of or competitively inhibit the ability of other components that have to interact with DNA from doing their job. And so the only other option is you would clutter the system to such a degree that it would create new problems.
Absolutely.
Right?
And even we don't know if there is so much of those, if the cell can live in this stuffed situation or not, because if there's too much of something, maybe it gets toxic. Nobody knows. Yeah. So there was actually one question, because you mentioned biomimetics and bioinspiration. So we had a question on the primary episode to you. Actually we had a request first, so let me read the request. So the request was from the question first, Dr. Rana. It's from Illidan, actually, Stormrage. She says, Dr. Rana, what are some beginner-friendly books for those who would like to explore the evidence of design in the fields of biomimetics and systems biology?
Wow. I don't know that anybody has really done an entire book dealing with the use of biomimetics as an argument, for design. So I've written a chapter in a book that I did called Building Bridges, where I introduced that idea, and I got to take part in another project called God in the World of Insects, where it was a friend of mine who's an entomologist, and he wanted to do a book on just design of insects. And so I wrote a chapter for that book on the use of insects as an inspiration for engineering.
Wow.
So insects are a rich source of biomimetics, but I've not seen anybody actually do a book on that. That's a huge need. I mean, one of the things that's frustrating for me as someone who spends time trying to write books on, the evidences for design, is that there's an avalanche of evidence, and there's only a few people with buckets trying to, pick up the
Yeah.
the rocks and do something with them, and so if you are interested in this area, this would be a great project, I think, for someone to do. So I wish I could give you a reference, but off the top of my head, I just don't know of anyone who's really, other than, a chapter here, a chapter there that people have written. I don't know that anybody is really presented a coherent approach to that.
Are you doing something around this point in your new book?
Not really. Yeah,
Not really.
it's yeah. So to me, I see this as really in and of itself something that could be, again, a very powerful argument for design, because if for those of us that consume kind of popular science articles, science in the news, people are constantly writing about work in biomimetics, and it's because people find it fascinating to think that here's a particular organism that is such a marvel that it's inspiring engineering. So science journalists love to talk about this work. So it's a great opportunity to engage in conversations with people about the latest breakthroughs. And to me, the argument is, number one, it just highlights the elegant designs. But for my perspective, the real argument is, look, if evolution happens the way that biologists claim it does, where it's an unguided process that's historically contingent, that is just making use of whatever is available, co-opting those designs and repurposing them to create new systems, that kind of process does not produce elegant, thoughtful designs. It's what we would call, kludge jobs, or something that's jimmy rigged, or a Rube Goldberg type of system. Although Goldberg systems are actually rather ingenious, so maybe that's not a good example. You wouldn't expect those kind of systems to be inspirational for engineers. In fact, if that's really the way biology was constructed, for an engineer to look for solutions to their problems in biology would be counterproductive. Everybody would look at them, uh, with askance, that why are you doing that, right? But nobody does. Everybody sees this as an incredibly fruitful area, and to me, the explanation is that this is the work of a mind, and you can give evolution 1,000,000 years, you can give evolution 1,000,000,000 years, and the nature of that mechanism is not going to produce elegant designs. It's still going to produce kludged systems that are evidently kludged systems.
And actually, I want to refer even to your last piece, which was actually off the presentation, where you said that even the DNA replication process, the primase, is probably employing a communication mechanism with the other components so that it will go and prime the replication start, and that even especially on the Okazaki part, that it will need to do it many times, and there has to be a signal to synchronize between the leading and the lagging strand, and probably electron signaling is also there. So once more, it's if the system is not there as a whole system, not only that damage will destroy the whole system without having the proper opportunity to fix itself, but even the system cannot reproduce efficiently. It will just collisions will be all over the place, and primase will be running, unleashed, and it will be complete chaos. And when I look at these things, and I'm just thinking that all of this is happening into this minuscule thing called the cell, and that within the same cell, even in bacteria, it's even unbelievable, because even that the DNA is not enclosed in a nucleus. So just beside the DNA, which is the data storage and the transcription is taking place, there is a metabolic process. There is a furnace, there is a furnace sitting beside it, floating power plants and metabolism and chemical reactions, and that this thing still works. And it's so versatile, and if you want to kill it, it doesn't die. You try to kill bacteria, it doesn't die, and even sends DNA over plasmids. The whole system. It's really crazy that somebody would think that this is, by any figment of imagination, that this is even close to being possible, to collect all of those thousands or millions of machines, employing every technology on the planet that we know and every technology that we do not know, so that it works in this very small size. And then to make it even more crazy, that like 30-40 trillion of them can come together to form a human being, for example. It's completely crazy. However, some people believe it, and but we are here to marvel on the magnificence of our creator who has done this. So I have a task actually for the viewers. So I want everybody who views this, every one of you, you have a task. Okay, this is like a task. Okay, you have to send this to 10 people who would not have seen it unless you sent it to them. Okay, and you ask them to be with us here next week, because if we're not going to do this to help our young and our loved ones and people who will be, if you sit and watch any of those shows on TV, the XX Geographic or the Discover X channel or whatever, okay? And evolution is said in every sentence twice, and between every two sentences 3 times. And it's just being poured into the minds of young kids. And we have an obligation to really propagate this. So I really want everybody who's watching this to send it to 10 people, to tell them about this series, and to have them with us on the next episode. Our friend Man's Man here, he has another one. He said, could the problem be because these evolutionists are content with sniffing their own come on, and engaging in nothing but thought experiments, whereas engineers are deep in the realm of practical? What do you think? Is it regardless of the hydrogen sulfide thing. What do you think? Is this an excuse that biologists are really not into the practical thing, or it is really a matter of denial rather than a matter of ignorance?
Well, I mean, I think there's two things going on. One is really a deep commitment to a materialistic explanation among biologists. I mean, when people talk about the Darwinian revolution, and what Darwin did that was revolutionary was to say that his mechanism of natural selection could even explain the design that we see in biology. And so what he did is he replaced the mind with mechanism, the mind of God with the mechanism of evolution. And prior to Darwin, biologists thought in teleological terms. They thought that what they were looking at in biology was designed. And so what was happening in other areas of science, geology, physics, chemistry, was mechanism was becoming supreme. And so biologists were really looking to have a mechanistic undergirding for their discipline. And the net effect is that now there's no more design, there's no more purpose. It's all essentially mechanism. And that mindset is manifested in the sciences today as something called methodological naturalism, where you are looking for mechanistic, materialistic process explanations as opposed to appealing to the work of a creator, regardless of what the evidence says. So, in part, I think what you see with biologists is this commitment to materialism, commitment to methodological naturalism, which means that evolution by default is the only explanation, right?
Yeah.
But yet you
Yeah.
have this interesting phenomena within biology where biologists cannot avoid using design language, right? And so instead of calling it teleology, they call it teleonomy, which is essentially saying we can use design language because we all know that really evolution did it, not a mind. So it's an
Yeah.
excuse to use design language without really recognizing that when you're using design language, that really is suggestive that there's ultimately design that undergirds it. So you have these really odd juxtapositions that we've been talking about, like the
It's
comment that
yeah.
the moderator makes after Jacqueline Barton's presentation.
It's
So I think that
it's a love-hate relationship between biology and design.
it is, but in my experience, when you present the case for design in biochemistry or biology to engineers, almost always there's a very positive reception that they see the bona fide design. And I think it boils down to, if you've tried to create designs and then you know what a design looks like. When
Yeah,
something is designed, you know what that looks like, versus
absolutely.
when something is not designed, and you know when something is really well designed or elegantly designed. And that's why I think engineers respond. It's endemic in their discipline.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
engineers are not beholden to the dogma of methodological naturalism or the dogma of materialism. It's not
Yes,
endemic in their discipline.
absolutely. Because it's generally a discipline where there is a design because there is a designer. There is a building or a car or a computer because there is a civil or a mechanical or an electronics engineer. So there is always, if there is something, there is somebody, there is someone who did it. No, no, not anything else. We have here a nice comment by Elias. He says, I've tried my best to archive all the positive pregestation mutations that have been documented in the last 100 years and couldn't find a single one. I think he's referring to finding a real positive mutation that has created something de novo. So, what's your comment about that? I have tried myself actually to find a single beneficial mutation that has created a novel function. I have personally failed. Even those that came up in some of my debates with evolutionists, I don't know, like nylonase digestion, like lactose intolerance stuff, all of those things. And what I eventually find is that either the function was there, it was just turned off, or that, for example, in the case of nylonase, actually bacteria knew how to metabolize nylon before we invented nylon for some reason. So
Well, I mean, yeah, I would agree with that. And, for example, the mutation that causes sickle cell anemia, it's not a good mutation. It's a deleterious mutation, but if it does help people avoid malaria, then that mutation will persist in the population. So that's an example of kind of what Michael Behe calls a burnt bridge mutation, where you're doing something to the system that does have benefit, but that benefit is coming at a cost, at a loss of function, ultimately, in some capacity. And so, I'm very sympathetic to that point. And the reason why bacteria are able to digest nylon is because nylon is a synthetic version of a protein. So
yeah,
nylon is a polyamide, right? And proteins are polyamides. And so it's not surprising to me that bacteria could break down nylon. Now, the side groups are going to be something that bacteria are not going to naturally have ever encountered, but you're looking at microevolutionary changes that are modifying pre-existing enzymes so that nylon can be the substrate, but there's nothing being created. So to me, I see mutations as maybe modifying existing designs, and depending upon where you would draw the line as to whether is this an increase or new information or not, that's arbitrary. But you don't really see that kind of mechanism generating what we would call biological novelty, right? Where this is generating, a brand new system. And again, going back to this idea of synthetic biology, one of the areas in synthetic biology is now where engineers or bioengineers are trying to engineer organisms like yeast or E. coli so that they're able to carry out very complex metabolic processes. And what they're doing usually is picking and choosing genes from different organisms and then kind of introducing them all into the genome of the yeast. But then they've got to go in and do all kinds of manipulations to other systems to get those metabolic pathways to work. And so, yes, they are creating yeast, for example, that now can synthesize a drug compound that otherwise would be very difficult to make chemically. So it is a novel organism, but this is what it would take to evolve an organism, a microbe, so that it is now able to make a new metabolite, right? Is somebody is picking and choosing pre-existing capabilities and combining them in novel ways. But that is not just throwing the genes into the genome. There's all kinds of regulatory systems that you've got to manipulate. You've got to shut down metabolic pathways or divert metabolic pathways from what they naturally do to get the organism to produce enough of the product for it to be useful. So, you don't see a lot of novelty coming, through this mechanism, or any novelty that I'm really aware of.
wow. So yeah, that's reassuring. So he's asking another question. He says, Dr. Fuz, are you familiar with the Million Mutation Project? Well, I'm not familiar with it. I'm not.
Yeah, I can't
What is
say
it?
that. I can't say that I am. That tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. So we'll wait until he tells us something about it. And here we have another question from Storm Rage. He says, it is denial most biomimetics articles start by feeding people the politically correct interpretation evolution, as if they are scared people would draw the natural conclusion. I think this example of the gentleman who closed the session with politically correct naturalistic comment, I think is very typical even in scientific papers, and I find it really astonishing. Mansman says, does Dr. Faz feel that the term evolution has been hijacked rather than simply meaning change? It's become inextricably linked with natural selection by random mutations. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, one of the things that I think it's really important for people to pay attention to is what is meant when people use the term evolution. And something that I've done in the past that gives a helpful handle, I think, to people is to catalog the different ways that people are using the term evolution, right? And it does simply means change as a function of time. And so I don't know of anybody that essentially would be opposed to the idea that, and it's even through the mechanism of natural selection or sexual selection, that organisms can vary with respect to time, that in response to changes in the environment. A lot of times that evolution isn't the generation of new alleles or versions of genes, but it's a change in the frequency of naturally occurring alleles. So the textbook example is the peppered moth changing wing color in response to changes in the environment. Nobody disputes that, or so that would be microevolution. I actually think speciation happens. So again, the Galapagos finch makes its way to these islands as a single finch species that then diversify on the islands into a variety of different finch species, but they are still finch species. There's no new designs that are really being created. The body size might change, the beak shape might change, the beak size might change, but it's nothing that is really remarkable. It's remarkable that organisms could do that. You could see this as part of God's providential care for his creation, giving or to use an engineering example, to be able to respond to the environment is a brilliant engineering design. The thermostats in our house, which the men turn down and the women turn up, right?
Yeah. It's the same struggle everywhere, it seems.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that's a brilliant engineered system, so that the heating and cooling systems in the house are responding to changes in the temperature in the environment and the temperature in the interior of the home to keep it at a constant level. So to design organisms that can do that is brilliant, or microorganisms evolve. And we talked about the bacteria acquiring the ability to digest nylonase, or to digest nylon using the enzyme, the new enzyme nylonase, right? Nobody disputes that, right? But it's here we see evolution as being, again, part of the design. What I think everybody disputes is what we would call macroevolution. Evolution having the ability to invent new systems, to create novelty, to create innovation, or chemical evolution, molecules self-assembling into a bona fide cellular entity. Again, that's something where it's a type of evolution. And these two areas where evolution has creative power is where we see the most significant and scientific challenges even acknowledged by evolutionary biologists themselves. So, it really is important that we think through what exactly is being said when the term evolution is being used, and don't let somebody play what my friend Hugh Ross calls the shell game of evolution, where you say, well, of course, human beings, evolved because we have evidence that humans are evolving now. And what they're referring to is, the ability to digest, lactose through, a mutation to a regulatory region of the gene that encodes the enzyme lactase. It's an elegant design to say, hey, for the first 2 years of life, the infant has the ability to digest milk sugar. And then when it's time for weaning to take place, your biology is working with you, right?
To push you away from suckling.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. That enzyme is shut down. It's only, I mean, people that can digest milk sugar, are mutants, right? Because it's not the natural state of things. Now, it just turns out that that's advantageous for, the when agricultural practices emerge, right? But nevertheless, it's an example of microevolution. But I've seen people say, well, clearly humans are continuing to evolve, so it makes sense that we must have evolved from some ape-like creature. See, what's happened is people have changed the definition of evolution using evidence that well establishes microevolution, and then importing that credibility uh, to an area of evolution that is much more speculative, that hasn't really been robustly demonstrated. So just pay
Okay.
attention and don't let people play the shell game with you.
Yeah. So actually, what you were saying, it brought to my mind three things I wanna say. Number one, about the thermostat thing. So yeah. So actually, it turns out, because I was in this debate with some evolutionists, and he referred to the finches, and it really pissed me off. So I set out on a mission to find out more about the finches stuff. And eventually I arrived to this, because I came across something that says that the rapid change to the beaks and the body size was epigenetic. So I set out to find the paper, and I found the paper. It's a recent one. I think it was a 2018 paper. And it concludes that the changes to the finches that cause that, even if we call it speciation, because the mating calls change with the change of the anatomical structure of the finches, but they are actually not genetic at all. They are epigenetic, and the genes are the same. And that they did actually the experiments by removing the environmental stress of changing the food type. And guess what? After a few generations, like 10 generations or something, or something in this order, a few tens of generations, that the finches have actually receded back to their original beak size and body size after re-establishing the same source of food. So it brings me back to the thermostat thing. So you can actually tune the thermostat so that the AC would give hot and cold. It's like you can tune the radio, fine or coarse, button or dial, so that it can tune into a different station. The station can be AM or FM, but no matter how much you keep tuning the dial, you will not make the radio pick up visuals and give you a TV screen. The radio will remain a radio. You can just dial the radio within what the radio is supposed to do. You can have a car that has 4x4 transmission and can have normal transmission. And the engineer has made it this way so that when you go to the desert, and if it's a smart car, it will automatically switch to a 4x4 mode once it hits sand. Okay? But it is built as a suburban car or something, or as a rally car. But without this feature in it, if you drive the car into the river or into the sea, be sure that it will not develop submarine capability. No matter how much, no matter how much you tune the transmission, it's not gonna do. There was this fiction series when I was young. It was about this car that was talking. It was called Kit. It was called Knight Rider. I'm not sure if you I was following it. It was fun. And the car in one of those episodes, a crazy thing. So the guy, I can't remember the name of the hero, but he's going after somebody who's kidnapped somebody in a yacht or something. And he runs with the car that's called Kit into the river or the sea, and it just rolls its tires so fast to the extent that it doesn't sink. Can you picture it? So it's like a duck that runs so fast over the water. So this is completely fiction, Yeah. You cannot tune what is built as a car to transform it into a yacht or into a submarine, unless the engineering design is there altogether. So I think even the matter of calling it, I don't like even using the term of microevolution, because essentially what is happening, every single example that I have looked into personally, maybe you have a different experience, it turns out to be not evolutionarily based in the sense of a random mutation was selected by natural selection. It is always that there is this standing feature. There is one sort of mechanism or the other that identifies an environmental condition and then triggers something to happen. And the Lenski long-term experiment for the E. coli, it started by denial, and then at the end they had to say, well, it's an acceptation, and the promoter moved in that region, and then suddenly citrate transport is it's triggered on, etc. So those are not really mutations in the sense of a random event causing anything. This is a cell that had all the time the ability to metabolize citrate, but just the transport, it was not being enabled to come in. Just a switch caused it to come in, and so on and so forth. And who knows, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, somebody comes up, because also when I went, you can confirm this, correct me if I'm wrong, after the lactose intolerance thing, or actually the lactose tolerance in this case, that actually the mutations in Europe and in Africa and somewhere else actually are 3 different mutations that happened, not the same mutation.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems that there is some mechanism that identifies that this population of human beings depend on milk for nutrition, and it can switch on the same capability in different ways. And I cannot really believe that this is a completely historically contingent process that just strikes the same lucky, completely random mutation in 3 different ways that causes something outside the gene to cause something to take place. And this is so I think that after some time, all what is today thought of as being microevolution, in the sense that mutation is driving it, I think it is evolution of the gaps, and that the gaps the gaps are really coming very slim. What do you think about that? Is it true?
Yeah, well, I think that's, I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's a very interesting hypothesis. And, because we do know that mutations, aren't necessarily random, right? And that certain genes, or there's hot spots in genomes, and so you could easily envision, going back to the thermostat analogy, that maybe the genomes of not only humans but of all organisms are designed in such a way to use the mechanism of mutation as a way to, in a pre-programmed way, to respond to obvious and anticipated changes in the environment. So I think what you're proposing, I don't know if it's true or not, but I bet you could probably find examples that supported your idea, and it very well may be that this is that the mechanism you're suggesting is far more pervasive than perhaps anybody necessarily would have thought. So I don't know if it's true, because I just not have looked into it myself, but what you're suggesting to me doesn't seem to be unreasonable by any means, and I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't turn out to be that way.
Great. So actually, we'll conclude today by having somebody who's actually coming onto the platform. So I have here James from James Steyer. Faz, do you have like 10 more minutes to
Oh, yeah,
spare?
yeah, of course. Yes.
All right. So we'll bring James. Maybe he has a question for you or something. So,
Yeah,
hello, James.
I'm not even clean shaving. I promptly came on when I saw you were doing a live. I was looking at the description of this. A very fascinating conversation. Could you maybe give me your thoughts? Because in the description it talked about how science and then the DNA were starting to come together, like as in mechanics, or almost, I guess, just a fun way to say it is the T-1000, the Terminator kind of scenario.
Yeah, I'm sorry, James. I'm not quite sure I'm tracking with your question. I apologize.
Let me pull up the description.
We have another comment until James pulls this out. He says, Ahmed, check out Brian Miller's articles on Evolution News explaining adaptation through engineering models within the constraints of design of the organism, summarized in the links I made. Yeah, so I'll check that out. Actually, I will try to reach out to Brian Miller actually to have a conversation with him. He's a very interesting person, and he is actually an engineer too. So
Yeah.
I guess
Okay.
an electronics engineer. Yeah.
So this may
So
help
thank
me
you.
frame the question better too. So it says DNA wire properly is remarkable, and it serves as inspiration for design in the next generation of electronical devices. That's kind of what I meant by the T-1000 Terminator joke.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what we talked about in the program that preceded the after show was the discovery of the fact that you can actually conduct electrical current along the length of the DNA double helix. And so people are looking at using DNA as nanowires in nano devices. So people that are working in nanoelectronics can make use of DNA to build these, nano electronic types of devices. And it's also serving as inspiration for, the development of, nanowires that wouldn't necessarily be, based or wouldn't be biological materials, but yet their design would be inspired by what we see with DNA. And so that's what we were getting at. And the part of the point too is that the cell actually makes use of this wire property to detect damage in DNA, or to it plays a role in DNA replication. So we see some very interesting technology that is kind of incorporated into the design of biochemical systems. So that's kind of the point that we're getting at is, really if you see this level of engineering sophistication, in biochemical systems, that really to the point where, nanotechnologists are deriving inspiration from it, it really is highly suggestive of the fact that there's a mind behind all of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it was fascinating. I got to go back and watch it because that's, like I said, that's not my area of specialty at all. I'm more theology and conversation driven, but it is kind of neat because if they can start, like you said, the DNA can actually be used in that type of a format, but then it can also speak to the fact that it shows more probability that we are designed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the comment that the short clip that you played at the beginning, Ahmed, of the show about the moderator making the comment. One of the things that I think is, you mentioned, James, your interest in theology. One of the things that I think we both would agree upon from both a Christian and Islamic perspective is that this idea of discovery, that he mentions it's up to us to discover what evolution has done, but to me it's up to us to discover what God has done.
Absolutely.
And that God, instead of just saying here's everything that I did, rather has given us the joy of studying the world around us. And as we do that, we are able to marvel and see God in biology, and as a result of that, worship God and give honor and glory to God. But there's something deeply satisfying in the process of discovery. That if we're willing to invest our efforts, that we end up are being rewarded for that activity of discovery. And I think it brings pleasure to God, but also as a side benefit is that if we're willing to do that work, not only do we see God's marvels, but then God has unleashed in the creation this understanding that we can then use to better our lives, right? That
Yeah.
so as a Christian, I would say that this is God's providential care for us, and that when we discover the world around us, we are unleashing God's providence, and so it's a combination of being able to see God's glory and majesty, but also to recognize God's faithfulness and his love to us through his provision.
And when you guys were talking, as soon as I jumped on, I had to jump on when you did the Knight Rider analogy. Because I'm a
Okay, so
huge
you were a fan? Okay.
David Hasselhoff was the star of Knight Rider, and
Yeah.
then the car name was Kit, I believe, and
Kit,
it did
yeah.
the voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it. Yeah. So, James, I have one request of you. So, since you came here, and I think this is a kind of a show that is in the area that is between science and theology, really. So, what we're trying to do here is to really see God's handiwork in creating us and creating living things. So, if you can give us a shout out, that would be also great. And we really want as many people who are looking for faith to join this, whether Muslim, Christian, or any other person who is looking
Yeah,
to
I'll
find the
take this
creator.
clip
Yeah,
and I'll upload it on my channel and I'll tag you in it just to kind of give a shout out to what you're doing.
sure, looks good. So we have like a couple of comments more here, and then we can call it an after show. So Man's Man has a small question to you. Fuzzy says, question on speciation. At what point does a species turn into one that is sexually incompatible with the one that bore it? So when would you call this a new species in your opinion? In my opinion, the word species is very blurry, kind of.
Yep.
It's like sort of discretionary.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because there is a running debate among biologists as to how to define what actually a species is. And so when you talk about the idea of speciation, it really becomes unclear as to exactly what you mean by that. And it's interesting because there's a lot of phenomena in biology that we intuitively understand, but we can't actually define. So nobody can define what actually life is, right? We can describe life. You and I know if something is alive or if it isn't.
Yeah.
And it seems to go beyond just experience. There's something a living system is able to do that we immediately recognize, but we can't actually produce a workable definition of life. Likewise, with a species, we intuitively know what a species is, and we recognize it, but nobody can really define what it is. So it's yeah. So I don't know that I can be of any help to that in terms of answering that question.
I think it's also one of those terms that have been hijacked for ulterior motives, because at the end of the day, zoologists or I don't know, biologists would like to define species as this group that can mate and produce fertile offsprings. But then this becomes a reproductive category. And then if you take this and you say that if speciation takes place, which means that the new finch cannot mate with the older finch, maybe just because it will produce a mating sound that the other one will not recognize, or that one animal becomes nocturnal and the other one, is active in the day or whatever, and then you call that a different species, and then you extrapolate that to the extent that you say that mutations can cause speciation in terms of complete differentiation in body plan or new organs or new functions or novel traits, is really a complete far-fetched, and is once again a very bad use of linguistics for serving a specific agenda that is to the least not scientific, to use a term in completely two different contexts to do these kinds of extrapolations. If you know what I mean. I'm not sure if you would agree to this in concept.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and this is kind of the point of the being aware of the shell game of evolution, where you start with one definition and and everybody agrees that that phenomena is real, and then the next thing you know, the shells are moving, and now suddenly you're talking about something else completely different, right?
Absolutely, it's like magic on in a suburban festival or something. Somebody's playing tricks on the crowd. Yeah. So I think we have a final comment. So dissecting Quran channel. I'm not sure if that means it's positive or negative. He says to think there isn't a designer at work is asinine. I think asinine means like stupid or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. There is no designer. Looks like something that is completely out of this world. So at the end of this, again, I would really remind everybody who has shared into this to make a shout out to at least 10 people who did not know already about it. And we're doing this every Thursday at 5 p.m. GMT. That's 9 a.m. PST. And the after show comes right after. All the episodes are less than 1 hour. So the after show is at the top of the hour, which is 10 a.m. PST, 6 p.m. GMT. And this is every Thursday. This is just the first episode after episode 0. And we still have like 15 to go for the first season, let's say. And next time we will actually be talking about this marvelous topic, which is even bit parity code. And okay, I have the Finding Truth banner hiding the word code, so I will just try. Yeah, here you go. So even bit parity code is what we're going to talk about next time. And for those who like computer systems, even bit parity or parity in general is a well-known computer algorithm for error detection, and even can be used for correction with a little bit of some ingenuity. And guess what? I'm an electronics and an information expert, and Faz is the biochemist, and we will marvel God's design once more, seeing God's hand using those unbelievable techniques that we have arrived to use thousands and thousands of years after coming to this earth. And God is just putting them inside us to marvel his creation. And next time we'll be doing that, seeing God in biology once more. And thank you, James, for coming. And thank you, Fuz, for your teaching. And thanks everybody for being here. And please do a shout out for us. And peace be upon you all. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And please enjoy your weekend. Thanks a million, Fuz.
Thank you.
And here we go.